All right, so we're going to talk about some interesting concepts. Bitcoin is a very multidisciplinary thing, and it's also quite confusing. And so we're going to try and illuminate some of these by going through, actually, some of Anil's work. So Anil, do you want to just quickly explain a little bit about what you've done with this?
So I make little tiny pictures that I hope help people grok Bitcoin, because I don't like it when people feel intimidated by Bitcoin. I think everyone has the capacity to understand it, and I think that's really important.
Great. Okay, so let's go to the screen. If we can get these slides up. Okay, there we go. So there's the first one. And so we're going to talk through some of the concepts here, and hopefully that will be interesting for you out here. And it might also be interesting when you're explaining these concepts out to your family and friends so they can learn about Bitcoin too. So Anil, let's start with you. What's going on here?
Very simple. Money is not some static thing. It changes over time. And it changes because technology alters the incentives of holding one form over another.
Yeah. Jan, you want to add anything there?
Yeah, I think one of the things that I use when I explain Bitcoin to people is when they're really not familiar with the idea at all, is first sort of prime them on the evolution of money, right? We had barter, potentially, commodity money, precious metals, that kind of thing. And these days, money is going digital. I think that's something that a lot of people, kind of implicitly know, but you have to point it out sometimes because they don't really think about it, right? They go to the grocery store, they take their iPhone, they pay Apple Pay, and that's money now, right? So when you point out that most money is already digital, it's much easier to kind of discuss Bitcoin because you say, okay, you know what digital money is, you're already using it, but there is a difference because one of these is run by the government and the banks, and the other one is run by the people. So it's a much easier framing when you kind of focus on that evolutionary path.
And something else to add there is just how people find it so confusing when you try to explain Bitcoin to them. But here's the other reality. Ask them, do you know how the fiat system works? Do you know how Fedwire works? Do you know how the SWIFT system works? Because the reality is many people are using these systems all the time without even knowing. And the other aspect that we can understand from the history of money is this concept that the technology sometimes is a limitation. Gold may have been technologically limited in some ways because of the cost of sending it around the world, the cost of verification. And so, interestingly, as you called out in this slide, you might recall that Anil had, it was orange, gold in the gold side, green on the fiat side, and orange again on the Bitcoin side, right? The fiat, as our friend Vijay Boyapati says, we're living in the fiat interregnum. It is a temporary phenomenon, and in some ways we're returning back to what used to work, which was hard money. Okay, so we're going to move on now. We'll move to the next slide. Okay, so Anil, do you want to start here again?
Walking around Santa Monica, every conversation I've overheard since I've been here is dominated by rising prices. It's all about inflation. And call me a psychopath, call me toxic, slap whatever label you want on me. I believe you should not have your purchasing power arbitrarily debased through no fault of your own. So, people unfortunately are feeling the effects of that right now, and it's leading them to look for answers. And the root cause of that lies in central banking, manipulating the money supply. And I like to think of this image as the Bitcoin marketing funnel, and everyone's kind of entering the funnel now through that pain of rising real prices. And the mistake I used to make all the time was skipping forward to the solution. When people aren't open and receptive to a solution until they understand the problem. Help them understand how they're being screwed by the current system, and maybe then they'll want to opt out.
Jan, one common thing that we find when we're out here trying to educate people about Bitcoin is that it might be very easy to have a conversation about the rising cost of living with people because that will resonate very clearly with them. But what's more difficult is drawing that and tracing the chain, let's say, of causation back. Do you have any tips on trying to help people understand that?
Yeah, I think, first of all, from my personal experience, I grew up and nobody ever sort of told me anything about inflation, right? I just kind of saw prices rising. I used to go to the gas station and it was like $1, then it was like $2, then it was $3, right? You kind of just live your life with the implicit understanding that prices rise, okay? Things get more expensive over time. It's not really clear why. And then you live through a period like we've lived through in the last couple of years where you see an acceleration. And all of a sudden, you start to wake up a bit more because what used to be kind of this like slow boiling has become a lot more visible. And now you're saying like, well, I used to be able to afford this amount of stuff when I went to the grocery store. Like, I walked out with 3 bags of groceries for $100. Now I get 1 bag of groceries for $100. Something's changed, right? And I think when you look at, a lot of the mainstream media and a lot of discussions in the media around inflation, there's all these sort of, economists and academics writing about how complicated inflation is and how many different things are, go into it and how do we measure it and, what's really true and what's really not true. And in my opinion, it clouds it clouds the issue, right? Because if you actually go back to a very simple concept that I think most people intuitively understand, which is supply and demand, you have a certain supply of something, certain demand for something. I mean, if you just increase the amount of stuff that you have, to pay with, of course, it's going to devalue that stuff that you're paying with, right? So there are simply more dollars. It's not really complicated when you explain it to people that way and you say, more dollars have been created, therefore the value of each individual dollar is less. And I think that is a really simple thing, but so few people actually know that that's what's been going on, right? Like they don't understand that the supply of money has been increasing.
Great, okay, let's move to the next one. Okay, so here we're talking about systems of measurement. And so I think for me, the first reaction for me is my friend Pierre Rochard, who's also a speaker at this conference, legendary in the space. And one way he likes to frame it and explain Bitcoin is it's the least uncertain monetary system, right? Because everybody knows, or at least everybody here knows, there'll never be more than 21 million Bitcoin. And that gives us more confidence in this particular system. So any reflections to add there, guys?
I'm not sure where I read this analogy. It might have been Seyfedin, actually, about kind of using like a rubber ruler, right, to measure things. And if you think about money as a way to measure value or as a way to transmit information, right? Like if I want to say, I'm interested in whatever service you're providing, I'm willing to pay $100 for it, and somebody else comes in and say, I'm willing to pay $200 for it, that's information, and that information causes the supply chain to adjust, right? So more demand comes in, that's information saying we want to have more of this good, and that helps the producer of the good or the service to increase the production and to pay for the production, right? But if you are not using some sort of rigid thing, like to actually poke and send that information, and that thing is wobbly and stretchy, then the information is lost. And actually, I grew up in the Soviet Union, where prices were basically fixed entirely by the government, right? So you actually had a complete breakdown of the transmission of pricing information. And so, for example, you could get an apartment for free. The only problem there was you would have to wait for 20 years because obviously there was a shortage of supply, right? So just because somebody said it should be free, all of a sudden it caused a huge problem in the market. We're not going to produce more inventory if it's free, right? That's a big problem. On the other hand, like a pair of jeans, would cost you a month's salary because they were in short supply and high demand. Everybody wanted to be sort of have that Western cool look. So I think it's really important that prices are being able to transmit directly, and we can actually influence the information in the supply chain to actually make goods and services available when they're needed.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think people adopt the systems that are more inherently useful to them. And Bitcoin having a perfectly inelastic supply does that. It gives you a measuring stick, a barometer, to compare prices over long periods of time, something that's like grossly lacking in our current system. So I think many of you here, myself included, are drawn to Bitcoin because it provides that long-term certainty. And at the end of the day, we're just uncertainty reduction machines trying to survive and reproduce. So, yeah.
And related to what Anil was saying, I think I'll add one more angle here. For many people who are long-time Bitcoiners, they think of their net worth in Bitcoin terms. That might be an interesting frame of mind for you to do, because you might be thinking, well, do I buy this house or not? Do I engage in this project or not? Now, of course, there are other angles other than financial, but if you're just thinking from a financial perspective, think about that next time. And if you looked at, let's say, that the house price 5 years ago, priced in Bitcoin versus the house price today, you'll find a very big difference. So it's actually quite a useful thing. And as Anil was saying, you can adopt a framework that's useful for you today, even if the rest of the world does not.
Yeah, just one last point. If you price any long-term or significant purchase in your life in Bitcoin and maybe just look at that chart a few years back, it just highlights and hammers home the true opportunity cost of parting with your Bitcoin today. And that's what you want in something that can accurately signal deflationary prices over time.
Fantastic. So we'll move on. Okay, so here we're seeing different types of things that can be used as money or potentially even housing. So Anil, do you want to explain a bit further?
The idea here is that money is not something we randomly choose. Currently, we live in a system where it's forced upon us, but ultimately, people independently assess all options they have to use as money. So they survey a range of monetary goods across several monetary properties: scarcity, divisibility, portability. There are several. And a great essay that will really hammer this home, if you have time to read it, I really suggest you do that, is by Parker Lewis. It's called "Bitcoin Obsoletes All Other Money." And a key idea from that essay is that all forms of money compete with all other forms of money for every transaction. And you see Bitcoiners or people adopting Bitcoin as their unit of account. You don't see many Bitcoiners going back to fiat. So money is a winner-take-all market. There is no prize for being second best. So get Bitcoin or get demonetized is basically the thesis of this.
Yeah, I just wanted to add to that this concept that people survey the market and choose the best money might seem not true in America because we have dollars, right? We don't really survey the market and choose the best money, except for the people in this room, of course, who have actually done that. Most people don't actually have a variety of things to select from. But I think if you go outside of the US, you see a different pattern because you have people with typically a native currency in their country. Typically that native currency is not doing well. And so they actually have multiple choices. They have their native currency, they've got their dollar, sometimes they can have access to that, and they have Bitcoin. So in other countries where there is actual debilitating inflation, right? We could say in America it's pretty bad, but it's really not compared to a lot of the world, places like Turkey or Argentina or Iran or really anywhere. When we have people all over the world that work for Swan, and some of those people, and we have somebody in Nigeria, they want to get paid in Bitcoin. And it's not because it's some sort of cool thing to do, it's because they have surveyed the market and they've decided that Bitcoin is a better store of value than their native currency. So it's a real thing outside of the US, and I think it might take us a while to get to that point. And right now it kind of seems like a very select crowd that's done that survey, but it is happening all over the world in a decentralized way, and that's what's causing the adoption of Bitcoin, because it is the better money.
One other point to add around monetary selection process. Sometimes there are people who have a slightly incorrect idea that it's just sort of that it's all just it's a lie or it's a story we all tell ourselves. But there are objective underlying characteristics that make some monies better than others. And as an example, you can look in history and see at different times and places, people still chose gold and silver as their monies. Why would that be, right? It's not that they had to have an explicit agreement to say, hey, let's all use gold as our money. It had, at that time, that was the best that we could do. That it had the best qualities of scarcity and divisibility and all of these components that make a good money. So the whole point of Bitcoin is to understand and assess why Bitcoin is a better money. And so I think that should hopefully explain this idea that it's not just a matter of, if we all tried really hard to make, grass money or toilet paper money, we couldn't do it, right? It just wouldn't, you could try, and maybe in certain contexts, historical contexts, maybe in a jail cell, cigarettes were money or things like that. But otherwise, there are qualities that matter, and it's not subjective. It's objective. There are objective qualities of that money, but of course, it's our subjective perception of those things that plays out over time, and goods arise as money. So with that said, we'll move to the next one. So Anil, do you want to explain what's happening?
Creative destruction. So this process of innovation where incumbents are rendered obsolete. applies to processes, it applies to materials, it applies to many, many things, and we are now seeing that applied to money. Bitcoin is better money. So it's just a very useful concept for understanding that nothing is really fixed. Humans are ingenious. They will find better, smarter, cheaper, more efficient ways of doing things. And Bitcoin is that for storing and transmitting value, the same way steel is a stronger building material, the same way the light bulb is superior lighting technology to a candle, the same way the internal combustion engine is more efficient to transportation via horse and carriage. So we're just seeing the process of creative destruction playing out once again, as it always does.
Yeah, and I think it's also important to look at why we think it's superior, right? And on which categories, because depending on what you think the problem that Bitcoin solves, you might get a different, you might go down a different track, right? So a lot of early adopters of Bitcoin, I would say, 2011, 2012, 13 era, thought that Bitcoin was a payment system. And so from that perspective, it's like, well, why would I use this thing? It's more volatile than the dollar. It's kind of slow. It seemed fast in the beginning because nobody was using it. It seemed cheap in the beginning because nobody was using it. And then it became expensive and slow. And now you see all these articles, Bitcoin can only do 7 transactions per second. It's not a good payment system. Well, you have to understand that this evolutionary process is actually selecting for much more important things than payments. It's actually the things that we talked about on the prior slide in terms of the hardness, the durability, the immutability, and the transmissibility and fungibility, all those characteristics that makes Bitcoin so powerful as a money, not as a payment system. That's a different thing. But as a money, we're talking about something that we can really truly store value. You usually use it as a real measuring stick without it being deformed. These are the things that make Bitcoin an evolution to fiat currency and to gold and things like that.
Excellent explanation there. So we'll move to the next one now. And I think this is an interesting one. Of course, people have seen that meme, maybe where there's a desk and there's all these things on that desk. There's a phone and there's a map and there's like a physical map, right? A map book. And all of those things got replaced by the smartphone, didn't they? So Anil, do you want to explain a bit further?
As Pierre Richard mentioned earlier, up in this couch, the process of dematerialization. And Stephan actually had a great interview with Michael Saylor about this exact topic. Go back and listen to it. It's episode 213.
Thank you.
So in the last decade, you all had front row seats to software eating consumer goods. You all saw it happen in real time. It's undeniable. And now you have front row seats to software eating monetary goods, or more specifically, draining the monetary premium that has accrued to those goods as a result of very sick money. So I believe Bitcoin is a sponge. It can absorb as much capital and value as you throw at it. There is no limit to that, and we're watching it play out right now.
Yeah, I think the concept of monetary premium for me was something very interesting that I learned about as I learned about Bitcoin, right? Because when you buy a house, you buy it to live in it, but partially in the back of your head, you're thinking, this is a good store of value. Like, I know house prices generally go up, right? So if I buy a house, I'll be okay in the future. I'll be able to sell that house. I'll be able to, maybe make some profit or at least not lose money. So you already implicitly understand that hard goods, things that are difficult to produce, things that, a house in Manhattan or an apartment in Manhattan or a house in a neighborhood. Like, I live in a neighborhood that only has 100 houses. You can't build any more inside the neighborhood. So the value of the houses is very, very good. It's very stable, only goes up because you can't build anymore. So people have an intuition that there's a certain value or a certain aspect of these sort of durable goods that causes a store of value premium, a monetary premium. But what that concept is that people use it as a substitute for holding money. Because I know that if I hold money in my bank, it'll be worth less in the future. But if I put it into my house, it's likely to at least maintain that value. And then you ask yourself, well, why would I put it in a house when that, has all these other variables to it, right? There could be an earthquake. Maybe they'll discover ways to build more stuff vertically, right? Whereas with Bitcoin, there's a very well and a very immutable policy. We know there's 21 million. We know exactly how hard this money is. And so, of course, if we had the choice between putting money into something that has a little bit of monetary premium or it's just pure monetary premium, which is Bitcoin, right? It makes a lot more sense to put it into the thing that is actually designed to be scarce, perfectly scarce.
Yeah, and Vijay Boyapati in the bullish case of Bitcoin perfectly explains monetary premium and utility value. So go and read that if you haven't already.
Excellent. Okay, next slide. Okay, so, all right, so what's happening here, Anil?
If you don't have scarcity in money, you will seek other scarce things to store your value or the fruits of your labor. If you do have scarcity in money, well, now everyone else is trying to produce value to convince you to part with that scarce money. So abundant money, scarcity everywhere else. Scarce money, abundance everywhere else. I don't want to keep plugging books, but go read Jeff Booth's The Price of Tomorrow if you haven't. Again, it perfectly encapsulates this.
Living in a deflationary future, I believe that's what's going to happen once we move to a Bitcoin standard. So imagine your salary sort of staying the same in Bitcoin nominal terms, but your purchasing power is going up over time, which is kind of crazy. And you know what? It could get even more crazy. You might literally, it could happen, it's theoretically possible, that your salary in Bitcoin terms is coming slowly down, gently coming down over time, while at the same time, your purchasing power is still dramatically rising, which is kind of crazy to think about, but it's possible. What do you guys think?
Yeah, that's an interesting concept, and I really like Jeff Booth's book as well. I'll plug that as well. One of the things he talks about, which we all experience, is that we already live in a deflationary regime, because look at technology, right? I mean, this thing in my pocket is basically a supercomputer from 30 years ago, and it costs a fraction of that supercomputer. So we already know that if things were left alone, we would be in a deflationary regime, right? Technology makes things cheaper, it makes things more efficient. Now we have AI, you know, the singularity, all that stuff happening. So we're going to get into a world where it's cheaper and cheaper to produce things, and that's already true. But we also have this counter pressure from, you know, the Fed, right? We're printing more money, we're expanding the monetary supply, and for some reason we decided we're going to come up with a magic number and try to outcompete the deflationary progress of technology. That number seems to be 2%. Which was kind of like a meme that just happened. And so we're arbitrarily trying to keep up the money supply with this deflationary pressure, which is really unnecessary, and it's actually, like we said in the prior slides, it's distorting that information. The information is that the thing got cheaper because the technology got better, so we should be in more abundance relative to the money, but we're constantly trying to inflate the money to counteract that.
Yeah, and if you want to capture the benefits of all the brilliant people around the world, you have to hold money that's going to capture the benefits of technology deflation. You can't hold fiat and benefit from human ingenuity. So denominate your life in Bitcoin, and you will benefit from that.
And interestingly as well, it doesn't necessarily mean you have to be all in Bitcoin. What he's saying is denominate in Bitcoin. So, you know, they're different questions. So I think it's also important just to keep that in mind, because some people, you know, for them, they're not ready to be all in Bitcoin, right? So yeah, we'll move on to the next one. And okay, go on.
So personal opinion, politics is just downstream of the impact of technology and the incentives of the current monetary system. And I think Bitcoin infests politics because it is superior monetary technology. We're all self-interested individuals. The people destroying your purchasing power right now, they still want a mechanism to protect their purchasing power, ironically. So Bitcoin transcends politics. Left or right, it doesn't matter. Self-interest wins the day.
And it's interesting to add here that, well, co-founder and CEO of Swan, Corey, his thesis is literally about this idea of 10 million the intransigent minority. If we, as a Bitcoin, a community of advocates, educators, whatever you want to call this, the movement, if we can grow the base of Bitcoiners enough that it just becomes untenable to actually ban Bitcoin or stop Bitcoin, well, think about what that could do for all of us, right?
Yeah, I think one interesting thing to know about in politics and in money is this idea of the cancel-on effect, so that the people that are closest to the money printer, get the benefit of that money printer first, and then it sort of trickles down to the point where now all the prices have inflated and the people at the bottom just kind of get the shit out of the stick. And I think, if you watch any of the reports about, how many billions of dollars Congress people have made on insider trading and, self-dealing and all this other stuff, it's all a byproduct of this basically, a monetary system that's entrenched in government, where if you're really close to those decision-making points, you can make a lot of money. And then that money will go out into the economy, and then the people at the bottom are just, they're seeing all the prices rise. So I think what's interesting about Bitcoin, kind of, in relationship to politics, is it removes that as a lever for politicians to be able to say, yeah, well, if I press this button, these people over here get rich, and these other people over here get poor, and puts it back in the hands of the people. And if you want to adopt Bitcoin as your store of value, then you benefit directly from your selfish decision, but at the same time, you're taking power away from those people to continue pressing that button.
Yeah, and if you can't beat them, join them. And Bitcoin is the only game in town that you cannot game.
Okay, we'll move on. Okay, so Jan, why don't you take a crack?
I have no idea what the slide is about.
Digital networks generally expand the pie versus their analog predecessors. Again, you saw that during the early days of the internet, and this is maybe Saylor's idea of dominant digital networks. They create new use cases, they open up new markets that previously were completely untapped or even in some cases locked away. So comparing Bitcoin to, say, gold, while that might be useful for someone, it misses the full gravity of what we're watching here. This is a global monetary network. It's just going to grow the pie in very unexpected ways. So think of it as zero-sum versus non-zero-sum games.
Yeah, I think Bitcoin is the first truly global, permissionless, borderless money, right? And it enables so much in the way of human collaboration, just like the internet enabled us to talk to people all the way across the world. And previously, we had communities that were isolated. They were either, national borders. First, before the phone, you had very local communities, right? So if you came up with some sort of concept, it was very difficult for you to transmit that new concept across the world. Then we had phones, we had, the internet, and now we have Bitcoin, which is actually creating a monetary transmission network. So not only can I collaborate with people from across the world, but now I can use money to do collaboration at scale, form corporations, form companies, form large projects that are decentralized, that can collect money and distribute it amongst their members. This is a very powerful thing. We have people at Swan here that, we have contractors in places like Nigeria. We pay them in Bitcoin. And I don't think I could imagine, 10 years ago doing something like that, because the complexity of sending money abroad, especially to places where banking is really, really underdeveloped or difficult to access, or comes with a huge tax, or their currency doesn't work, that's the kind of stuff that breaks the ability for people to collaborate. So once we have this perfect tool for transmitting value instantly across the world to any place, we can create collaboration networks that are previously have not been seen. And we're seeing it today in real life, and we're just getting started.
Give yourself an advantage. Use Bitcoin, right? We've got one more. We've got time for one more. So I love that this one is playfully recreating the MasterCard logo. Anil, do you want to start us off here?
First conclusion bias. So you're new to a field, and the first immediate thought that comes into your head must be the correct answer. This is the trap most gold bugs on one side and shitcoiners on the other side fall into, because they're looking at Bitcoin through one lens, and you have to look at it through both. You've got to do the work, because you understand you're not trying to perfect for one single thing. You're trying to do reasonably well at multiple. And in my opinion, Bitcoin's already won this race for that reason.
Right, and it reminds me of something I've often said, which is that you need a combination of economics and technological understanding to really grasp what Bitcoin is. Because otherwise you'll either be a fiat person or you'll be a shitcoiner or a blockchainer, right? If you don't sort of grasp what's important here. We've got about a minute left, so any last comments, Jan?
I will say that I do think Bitcoin requires a very multidisciplinary approach to understanding it. And just speaking for myself, I came from very much the technology side, and it took me a long time to get out of blockchain and crypto land into Bitcoin, because I was on one side of this graph. And I think once you start getting both pieces of that pie, you start to develop that understanding, and you start to see it, and then you start to evangelize it to everybody around you, because you can't help but share this knowledge. And I think we're underinvesting in education. In schools, we don't talk about money. We don't talk about why inflation is a thing, why central banks are a thing, why do these institutions exist, how do they come to be, how do we get off, different standards we had in the past, gold standard, how did the fiat system come to be? These are all things that are not well answered by our current education system. So I think it's up to us in this room to be those educators, to go out and talk to our friends and family and community, and to help people understand what's going on in the world, because you really need a very, very broad understanding to understand Bitcoin. So go out there and spread the message, please.
Fantastic. I couldn't have said it better myself. Everyone, please put your hands together for Anil and Jan.
Oh, hi. Do you have your ticket to the next Pacific Bitcoin Festival? Join us as we shine a light on the best of Bitcoin and Bitcoiners. Visit pacificbitcoin.com for the best deal on tickets now.